Try to hold this close enough, although I feel like I'm eating an ice cream cone. It's kind of my face. And it's a pleasure to be here. I was trying to remember the last time I was in the Taiwan Center, but it was some time ago, and I think there was some kind of a panel discussion on U.S.-Taiwan relations with a few local experts. I don't remember exactly when, but I think there might have been an election, and so there was a lot of media attention for what the experts on the panel might want to have to say. But I want to thank you for extending the invitation. And Peter and his brother have become good friends. And Simon we just started communicating through social media and some other things. But just he had so many interests. We have friends that talk about policy all the time, but Simon would talk about lots of things in life outside of politics, and we just had really fun interests. And then he and his lovely little family came through Idaho and stayed at our house for a few days when they were going onward to explore Yellowstone and some other areas. And so just very grateful to the Chun family. Of course, Peter served as distinguished leader of FAPA, the organization that brings us together tonight. And I do want to encourage everyone to really consider giving as much as you can to support an organization like this. Some of you know that there have been some activities in recent times that have taken a lot of the resources that were meant to be used to advocate for pro-Taiwan policy in the United States. It's instead had to go to pay for legal fees. And it's important for us to try to replenish the supply to support those that are actually working to promote a good, strong, I say pro-American, pro-Taiwan policy, because I don't think it's really just to be done to be a favor to the people of Taiwan, or just because we have common values. I think those are good things. But if we're going to get more Americans to support a strong policy for Taiwan, it has to be because they believe it's good for America itself to do this in a very materialistic way in some ways. So thank you very much, and I do hope that we're able to work together to build support for FAPA. I want to thank Jerry for the introduction too. We've spent time together in a few different places at different times. We did have fun in Taipei, and maybe we'll get the band back together and do that soon. I'll give a little bit more of an introduction of Kelsey when we share some of the time. Kelsey worked in the Idaho Republican Party when I was chairman, and she has a degree in communications, and she worked on communications and other things with the Idaho Republican Party. And it was during an election cycle, and so there were lots of different tools in politics that are used by candidates and groups all around the country and all around the world. And a lot of these tools can be used for issue advocacy organizations like FAPA. And so one of the things that I hope that you'll get from our sharing some time with you tonight is how FAPA local chapters might be able to do some of the things that were done in the party. And then when I left the party and ran to be lieutenant governor in Idaho, Kelsey was my campaign manager, and we tried to apply a lot of these tools and some other ones as well. And so trying to share some of these experiences with what you do to try to get people to understand what you're trying to communicate, to feel committed enough that they might give some financial contributions for you to be able to advance your cause, but also so that they care enough to talk about the issues that you care about and hopefully they care about, so that there's word of mouth that helps build awareness of who you are and what we're trying to do together. And then maybe if we get enough other people doing these things, then we'll have more pressure, positive and negative, for candidates that get elected to represent you and all the rest of us, to make sure that when they get elected, they feel accountable to come back and say, yeah, if I'm going to ask for your vote again, and if I'm going to ask for your contribution again, here's what I did to advance the things that we said we agreed on to support a strong U.S.-Taiwan relationship. So that's, in a nutshell, what brings me to spend some time with you tonight. And as I get a little bit towards the end of some opening remarks, I'll share the microphone with Kelsey for her to share some of the things that that she's been presenting to other FAPA chapters, that she's available to try to help with follow-up training, encouragement to be able to use some of these methods. So for me, some of you know who I am. I appreciate this design. This picture is a problem. You can go away with the picture. But I like the playing with the name of Ye Wong Hui with Stephen Yates in the middle, because a lot of times I run into people who don't have any idea who Stephen Yates is, but they know who Ye Wong Hui is. I was with a friend going to Tainan and Kaohsiung a few months ago, and so we took a taxi from Tainan to Kaohsiung, and I was riding in the car with former President Lee's chief of staff. And so by the time we got to Kaohsiung, he realized, oh, I know this guy, and he's with President Lee. And then he turned to another person and said, Ye Wong Hui, and the taxi driver goes, is that Ye Wong Hui in my car? So he didn't really know my face, definitely didn't know my English name, but whoever the Ye Wong Hui guy is, that was apparently a big deal for him. But it's fun to be able to have an opportunity to connect with people in Taiwan in a very, very different way. But I've been blessed over the years, from my time at the Heritage Foundation, before that as a missionary, after that in the White House, and then after the White House traveling around the country. The Taiwanese community has always been so welcoming to me and so supportive of me. And so first, I just want to say thank you to many of you in the room that have been encouraging to me. Some of you even made contributions to my political campaigns, and I want to say thank you for the support and encouragement. And we need to do more together to try to get more Americans who know something about Taiwan, have a passion for freedom and democracy, and who are also out there to help convince a number of Americans who are just beginning to have an awareness of the evil of the Communist Party of China, and that the impact that it is having inside our own countries, inside the United States. Some of our allies and strategic partners are having a domestic political debate about how to deal with the influence operations of the Communist Party of China. This is something that people of Taiwan have dealt with forever. Basically, from the time there was a People's Republic of China, there have been influence operations that have been trying to infiltrate and subvert the people and the government of Taiwan. And that remains active now. And in this 2020 election cycle, I expect it to be very, very aggressive. It's high-tech, weaponized influence operations. And we already know that the Chinese Communist Party, through its state powers, does a lot of this even in the United States. So we've had a lot of conversations about Russia. I'm not going to talk about that. But whatever Russia did or didn't do, it pales in comparison to the scale of influence the Communist Party of China tries to have in shaping the options of our government and our people here in the United States and our friends in Taiwan. So I think there's a beginning of an awareness now in the United States that's very, very different. That's one of the reasons why there's been a big uptick in Taiwan and China-related legislation in the Congress. And so it was somewhat easy for me to predict where the Trump administration would go when something like a Taiwan Travel Act came up, because I talked to some of my friends. I knew where their thoughts were and that they would probably be open-minded about these things. But for those of you who were active on these things in the 1990s, you might remember a Taiwan Security Enhancement Act. And that came up in the late 90s and in 2000, and it was heavily advocated in the Congress. I was at the Heritage Foundation, and I worked with the House and Senate leadership to try to promote the Taiwan Security Enhancement Act. We got an overwhelming vote of support in the House of Representatives, and we could barely even get a hearing on it in the Senate. And that had been the experience we had seen in Taiwan advocacy type work for too long. There was a big uptick in the 80s after FAPA was created, when a lot of Democrats were critical of the friendly dictator policy that was the accusation of Republican presidents. And so there was advocacy for trying to push for an end of martial law in Taiwan, making political parties legal and progress. That was the context for it. But then Congress kind of faded a bit on advocacy, and you'd have a lot of good things in the House of Representatives, but all good ideas would die in the US Senate. And they would never even get to a president's desk. So it really took somewhat of a change in perceptions of China to get the United States Senate to begin passing things. But I knew that if the United States Senate would begin passing things, that their bar was actually higher than the White House bar would be. And surprisingly to me, not only did the president sign every pro-Taiwan bill that the Congress has passed, he hasn't modified any of it with signing statements. So part of that process, some of you may know, but there's no reason why normal people should know this. But when bills pass the Congress, they go to the president to sign. And there is a tradition for presidents to sign these things, but they'll have a statement that goes on top of their signing papers for the bill. And sometimes those signing statements undermine the very nature of the bill that they're signing into law. So it says, I hereby sign this, but also instruct my agencies to do things that are very much at odds with the bill that I'm signing. And so what's very different is that President Trump just signed the bill. So the Taiwan Travel Act got signed, no commentary, just signed, and it's supposed to get executed. That's very, very positive, but we still need to work very hard to make sure that it gets implemented. Because as much as I will congratulate President Tsai on having a mostly successful 2 visits to the United States, and I call them visits, I don't use the word transit, I think that's a stupid fake term. But stupid fake people in the US government made it up, so we have to, that's how it's described. But if someone comes and stays overnight, I think that's a visit.
Thank you.
If you stay in the airport and kind of relax in a lounge and go on a connecting flight, I think that's actually a transit. But President Tsai had these visits. Some things were great and open. Some things could have been better if the U.S. government had a more open approach. It bothers me some that the Taiwan Travel Act was signed and we're still dealing with transits. And so I hope that everyone who supported the Taiwan Travel Act will communicate with members of Congress and have those members of Congress ask some very direct questions of the U.S. State Department about why this wasn't a visit. It's not necessarily the job of the Taiwan government or President Tsai to push the issue. This is about Americans governing America. And Americans should ask, why didn't our government allow for a speech by the democratically elected president of Taiwan at a U.S. university, Columbia, to be an open public event? And that should be asked and answered. Why can't the president of Taiwan or the vice president or anyone else go ahead and visit Idaho and thank
Montana.
one of the, I don't know, it's going really far, but it might be the start of a revolution.
Oh, okay.
Idaho first.
Idaho first.
Well, I actually don't think Washington, D.C. should be first, in part because I think the broader country is more important than what goes on in
I
D.C.
agree.
And so if we have the rest of America understand better what Taiwan is, who some of Taiwan's leaders are, if the leaders of Taiwan can go and thank Taiwan's trading partners and investors, those that are involved in promoting the security materials that the Taiwan government buys to help preserve the deterrent value of Taiwan, all those kinds of important relationships. I think it's great if leaders of Taiwan can go and thank state and local leaders. That would really be a positive reinforcement to members of Congress who vote on these things. If they saw that there was a real benefit in their own communities among their constituents that said, you know, that was really the right thing to do for you to support those arms sales, or to support a trade agreement with Taiwan, or to support an investment in a nice project that created jobs either here in America or in Taiwan, or both, even better. I sure hope that with all of the talk about Confucius Institutes and the Chinese misuse of universities and our universities getting overly addicted to red money, that we can maybe revitalize language training programs, but also other kinds of exchanges between Taiwan and American universities. Not that long ago, there used to be more balance in terms of different university programs and exchanges between those that wanted to go to China and those that would go to Taiwan, and lots of interesting interaction. The Chinese government has been extremely successful in pressuring universities to remove any Taiwan-related events from things that are happening on their campuses, even to the extent of if a Taiwanese student is elected the head of a student government organization, they will protest to have that student body president removed from office, which is a degree of ridiculousness that's hard to imagine. But we need to try to work together to build up that soft infrastructure around our country, to help awaken a lot of other Americans about what Taiwan is and what its value is. Some of you know that my first impressions of Taiwan were as a missionary. I traveled around the countryside of Taiwan. I was told that I was lucky that I was going to free China, and yet at that time martial law had just barely been lifted, and the countryside that I met, there were lots of families that had a very different experience. And my feeling at the time was this was not free and it was not China. And so it was something else. But I was very blessed to have that experience. And when I came back in my graduate school program and in work in government, I could ask really tough questions about why American policy is called One China. What is this? This doesn't make any sense to me in English. And they could try to tell me, oh, it's very complicated, and we have to have this for Taiwan, and the government of Beijing represents China. So that's interesting. I thought they were communists. Well, they're not really communists. Well, they call themselves the Communist Party. Doesn't that make them communists? And well, yeah, but we have these strategic interests. Well, I said, okay, so they're communists. And when they had this revolution, they established something called New China. Well, yeah. Well, so didn't they split China and create two Chinas then? Oh, no, you don't understand history. Okay, so educate me. So when they made New China, that must have been in contrast to Old China. And what was Old China? Old China respected families. Old China respected religion. Old China respected the history and culture of the people. In some ways, it's amazing that the world has allowed the Communist Party to co-opt Confucius institutes, since it was the Communist Party that ran anti-Confucian protests, literally killing people in trying to destroy these old ideas, as they said it. But we live in a strange time with now all that has happened. Think of what it used to be like when we were trying to advocate for Taiwan, and the world thought, if you're not doing business in China, you have no opportunity. And China's changing. It's becoming more modern and cosmopolitan. Now people are starting to see, under the Communist Party, they have taken the tools that were supposed to promote freedom, and now it has weaponized control and monitoring of societies. We have large-scale concentration camps in China's far west. Something that's never supposed to ever happen, it's happening now. The Chinese government has become its own worst enemy, in a certain sense. The people of Hong Kong seem to only care about money. But in recent times, an amazing proportion of the people of Hong Kong have been willing to step out at great risk, some of them getting beaten on video, so it's not like it's pretend, to stand up for their own struggle for freedom. This, I think, is going to touch more American hearts, so that we might have more open minds about, you see, this is the nature of what's happened to China. And if you want to talk about pro-China or anti-China, I think the only true pro-China position to have is that the people of China deserve to live free of the Communist Party. And until that time, I hope that we all work hard, and that every elected leader in Taiwan work hard to be against the Communist Party. So some of you may have read, I have 3 conditions for people that I want to cooperate with in Taiwan. First one is, you must be 反共. You have to be anti-communist. Second, You have to want to be America's best friend. All of us want the United States to stand up for the freedom and democracy and security of 23 million people in Taiwan. I think it's good for us as a people to do it. It's good for us as a strategy. But we need the people in Taiwan to recognize the nature of the threat that they're facing too, and to make sure they're doing everything they can so that more Americans feel like they're not just coasting on the risk that American military or others would be taking to try to balance an overwhelming threat from China. And so they need to be anti-communist, need to want to make America their best friend. Third, you need to have kind of a Taiwan first mentality. Put the interests of economic development of the people of Taiwan first and foremost. It's not about making a deal with China. It's not about trying to just say the right words that feed people's emotions. So I'm not blue or green, really. I'm not a DPP member. I'm definitely not a KMT member. I'm a Republican. And I hope that all you are either active in the Republican or Democratic Party, but I'm definitely not active in Taiwan's political parties. I want all of the leaders in all of the parties to take this kind of attitude to the maximum extent possible so that we can get more Americans comfortable with the idea of collaborating with Taiwan, but also taking a stronger stand at this moment, I think, of great opportunity to change minds in the United States and set a high standard for U.S.-Taiwan relations. What are some things that can be done? FAPA has a list of priorities. I'm not perfect at being able to memorize them and pass them along. You can go to the FAPA.org website and find some of these priorities, but one of them has to do with the name of the representative office in Washington, D.C. Some of you may know that the representative office in D.C. is called the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office, which, if I read English correctly, leaves out about 80% of the island of Taiwan that isn't Taipei. So, I don't like that. And I also think that since we have an American institute in Taiwan, not an American institute in Taipei, and we certainly don't have an American institute in the Republic of China. We have a Taiwan Relations Act, not a Taipei Relations Act, and not a Republic of China Relations Act. We have a Taiwan Relations Act. I think just for simplicity and clarity, transparency, the representative office in DC should be called the Taiwan Representative Office. That would be a very clear message of what it is, the Taiwan Representative Office.
Yes.
So, using the name. I think most Americans would welcome that. It's not really the job of the U.S. government to police what the name is called, but it would be helpful if friends of Taiwan and active people in the U.S. political system were to urge members of Congress to express support for Taiwan thinking of reconsidering this name for the office in Washington, D.C. There was a recent change of CCNA. How many here, just by way of a show of hands, even knows what CCNA was? Yeah. So the first time I was supposed to go to Taiwan, I had to get a visa from this organization called the Coordinating Council for North American Affairs. And I was trying to go to Taiwan, and I was very sure someone was stealing my money and giving me a fake visa. Because this said North America. This said nothing about Asia or Taiwan or anything. And so I gave some money, and I got this visa from CCNA, whatever. This was very questionable in my mind. And I was going to the country. Think what the rest of America thought. They have no idea what this is. But up until this year, there was an entity in Taipei called the Coordinating Council for North American Affairs. Makes no sense. But they just changed the name to something better. But the name they changed it to has Taiwan in it. Not Taipei, Taiwan. So there needs to be kind of a coordination to make this simpler and same. So FAPA as an organization advocates this name change for the representative office. Another thing is to make it so that the AIT director that goes to Taiwan is America's equivalent of an ambassador to Taiwan, not the chairman. The chairman has no role in policy, and has no role in trying to manage our diplomatic representation in Taiwan. It is the equivalent of that CCNAA organization, which also most people don't know exists and probably shouldn't exist. But our director of AIT is the equivalent of our ambassador to Taiwan. And like other ambassadors, we think that the AIT director should be Senate confirmed. And that would at least guarantee a hearing in front of Congress for members to ask questions, but also for the director to be treated by our own government as an ambassador before going and taking on that responsibility to Taiwan. It would also convey to the people of Taiwan a degree of respect that, and also help inform them that this director is seen by the US government as the lead representative of the United States. So it would maybe do away with some of the confusion between the role of chairman and director and things like that. So FAPA advocates having the director of AIT a Senate-confirmed position. And I strongly support that idea. None of this by itself is going to take Taiwan from being at risk of Chinese influence operations or the threat of military force and things like that, and make it all of a sudden safe. But these small steps can begin to show Taiwan some sense of dignity and respect. And if we can get Taiwan called by its real name, then we have some hope, but it's only the beginning of hope, that average Americans will know what this place is, why it's of value to the United States. And there's a lot of things we can talk about in terms of some specifics, and we'll have some extra time. But for a moment, I want to turn some time over to my friend and colleague Kelsey to talk about just some mechanics that we have used in politics, and maybe some of her personal anecdotes of how Americans generally can see things that are Taiwan related. And basically we'll want to try to encourage your chapter and others to adopt by way of some best practice. So.